the first thing to really talk about is I want to take you back to the beginning. And in 1995, you started.
Yep.
You went public in 97. And I'll adjust for stock splits, but you raised stock, you issued shares at $1.50 a share.
That's right.
In 1988, your revenue was $600 million, and you lost $125 million, but your stock had gone to $55 a share. So you doubled down, sales went up threefold, you lost another $400 million, but your stock went up to $76, $27 billion of market cap, your personal net worth of $9 billion. Take us back to that time where the market is telling you you're doing great, but you have red ink in the company. You took on $2 billion of debt from 99 to 01 while you doubled sales yet again. What were you thinking back then?
Well, that's a great question, and it is kind of fun to go back and think about those days. In those days when we had, I don't know, when I started the company and it was just one person, and then there were 10 people, and today there are almost 600,000 people. So there's a lot of change. But back in that time, we were still a pretty small company by most standards. In the era you're talking about, we had gone public, and you're right, on a split-adjusted basis, it's $1.50 a share in today's terms. And the market became very quickly a kind of an internet bubble kind of market, and the stock prices went up very, very high. When I raised the initial funding for Amazon, I had to talk to 60 prospective investors to raise $1 million, and I raised $1 million from 22 different investors, $50,000 at a time, and they got 20% of the company for $1 million. And that was in 95. But just 2 or 3 years later, Stanford MBA with no business experience could raise $25 million with a single phone call if they had a internet business plan. So the whole thing in just 2 or 3 years, the excitement, really, as we would shortly see when the bubble burst in the year 2000, the hyperbolic excitement about the internet had infected everybody. And I knew that we had I liked our business, and I liked the fundamentals of our business, but I also knew that the stock price was disconnected from what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. And so I was always preaching. We would have all-hands meetings, and it was a small number of employees at that time, but probably, let's see, in 97, I think we would have had a few hundred employees. We would have all-hands meetings, and I would say, look, we got to remember the great quote from Benjamin Graham that in the short run, the stock market is a voting machine. In the long run, it's a weighing machine. So don't think about the daily stock price, because it was going up every day. The stock price was going up. And I didn't want, because all the employees had stock options, and I didn't want them counting their success that way. And so I would say, look, when the stock is up 30% in a month, don't feel 30% smarter, because when it's down 30% in a month, then you're going to have to feel 30% dumber, and it's not going to feel as good.
Right.
And it was good that I kind of laid that groundwork, because, sure enough, in the year 2000, the whole thing came tumbling down. I think Amazon
went
stock
back about $6.
Went down to $6, and that I don't even know if that's on a split-adjusted basis.
Yeah.
I think that's probably on a split-adjusted basis, probably below $1.
Did you ever doubt the business model at that point?
No. So it's very interesting to me, because I had all the internal metrics on, how many customers we had and what was going on, and I could see people thought we were losing money because we were selling dollar bills for 90 cents, even though we were very clear that we were not. We had high fixed costs, but we had contribution margin, positive contribution margin. And I just knew that it was a fixed cost business, and as soon as we reached a sufficient scale, we would have a very good business. And so that understanding of the fixed nature of our expenses relative to physical world retail is what led us to have the get big fast strategy. We knew that it would be that our economics would be very much improved if we could have a sufficient scale. So we worked hard on that.
So at that time, you're preaching the benefits of e-commerce and really disintermediating the business. So fast forward to today, now we have content, we have physical Amazon stores, we have Amazon cashierless stores, which we used to call shoplifting. And then now
it's shoplifting without the jail time.
That's right. And then buying Whole Foods here from a Texas company. So how does that fit together, your vision, and then how do you manage these disparate businesses with different cost structures now?
Yeah, well, and by the way, just finishing up a little on that prior point before I answer that question, and also with the memory of Barbara Bush in all of our minds, I think part of, a lot of people in this room are entrepreneurs, started their own businesses, done various things, taken risks of various kinds, and I think one of the precursors, one of the foundational things to being able to take risk is to have had some kind of support from somebody. You have to have some mentors. You have to have somebody who loves you. These are the kind of things that build up and allow you to kind of, jump off into uncharted terrain and do something new because you have a support system of one kind or another. How can you do so many different things? Why don't you stick to the knitting? The kind of traditional advice would be to stay focused and keep the business simple. And the way I think about this is we actually do stick to one thing. It's just not described. It's not the business itself. We do web services, which is, big enterprises buying compute services from us, and we have our retail business, and we have Amazon Studios, which is making original content, Amazon Go, the things you listed. So, but the cultural thread that runs through all of these things is the same. We only have a few principles at Amazon, kind of core values that we go back to over and over again. And if you looked at each of the things that we do, you would see those run straight through everything. So the first one, and by far the most important one, is customer obsession. And we talk about it as customer obsession as opposed to competitor obsession. And I have seen over and over again companies talk about that they're customer focused, but really when I pay close attention to them, I believe they are competitor focused. And that's just a completely different mentality. By the way, competitor focus can work, but I don't think it works in the long run as well as customer focused. For one thing, once you're the leader, if your whole culture is competitor obsessed, it's kind of hard to stay energized and motivated if you're out in front. Whereas customers are always unsatisfied. They're always discontent. They always want more. And so no matter how far you get out there in front of your competitors, you're still behind your customers. So they're always pulling you along. So customer obsession is a deep principle that underlies everything we do. Another one is eagerness to invent. So we love to pioneer. And when we have done, by the way, whenever we have tried to do something in a kind of Me Too fashion, we have failed at it. We need to have something that is differentiated, unique, something that customers are going to like, that we're kind of leading with. So that's another element that works for us. And then another one is long-term thinking. We are willing to take some time and be patient with our business initiatives, and that runs through everything. So a lot of our competitors might have 2 to 3 year kind of time frames, and we might have more of a 5 to 7 year sort of time frame. And then the last one, operational excellence. So literally, how do you have high standards around, identifying defects, fixing defects at the root, all of those kinds of things that lead to what I think also can be in a simpler way, just stated as professionalism, that you want to do things right just for the sake of doing them right.
So let's talk about that with another, I guess this is a corollary. Now that you have about 600,000 employees, I calculated you're adding about 250 people a day. You've mentioned that you're trying to fend off day 2.
Yeah.
And you've said that day 2 is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciatingly painful decline, followed by death. That is why it is always day 1.
Yeah.
How's that work?
Well, so day 1, this is a phrase that we use at Amazon all the time. I've been using it in my first annual shareholder letter from 20 years ago. And we say it's always day 1. And it needs to be day 1 for the reason that you just mentioned. And so the real question for me is, how do you go about maintaining a day one culture? You know, it's great to have the scale of Amazon. We have financial resources, we have lots of brilliant people, we can accomplish great things. We have global scope, we have operations all over the world. But the downside of that is that you can lose your nimbleness, you can lose your entrepreneurial spirit, you can lose that kind of heart that small companies often have. And so if you could have the best of both worlds, if you can have that entrepreneurial spirit and heart, while at the same time having all the advantages that come with scale and scope, think of the things that you could do. And so the question is, how do you achieve that? The scale is good because it makes you robust. You know, a big boxer can take a punch to the head. The question is, you also want to dodge those punches. So you'd like to be nimble. You want to be big and nimble. And I find that there are a lot of things that are protective of the day one mentality. I already spent some time on one of them, which is customer obsession. I think that's the most important thing. If you can, and it gets harder as you get bigger. When you're a little tiny company, say you're a 10-person startup company, every single person in the company is focused on the customer. When you get to be a bigger company, you've got you've got middle managers, and you've got all these layers, and those people aren't on the front lines. They're not interacting with customers every day. They're insulated from customers, and they start to manage not the customer happiness directly, but they start to manage through proxies like metrics and processes, and some of those things can become bureaucratic. So it's very challenging. But one of the things that happens is the decision-making velocity slows down. And I think one of the reasons that happens is that people, say junior executives inside the big company, start to model all decisions as if they are heavyweight, irreversible, highly consequential decisions. And so even two-way doors, you make a decision, it's the wrong decision, you can just back through the door and try again. Even those reversible decisions start to be made with heavyweight processes. And so you can teach people that these pitfalls and traps, and then teach them to avoid those traps. And that's what we're trying to do at Amazon, so that we can maintain our inventiveness and our heart and our kind of small company spirit, even as we have the scale and scope of a larger company.
So 600,000 people, small company, which that's a trick. So I know the Bush Center, we focus on leadership. And I know that you're also a voracious reader. And you're fond of a book by Nassim Taleb called The Black Swan.
Yeah, sure.
And it's about human tendencies to reduce things to anecdotal stories, and to shield us from sort of the randomness of the way things actually happen.
Building narratives.
Yeah. And how
we humans can
that?
create a narrative around anything. To connect any sequence of facts, we can create a narrative.
So how do you infect that throughout the whole organization when you have that many layers?
Well, I think that, what I would say about that, and it's really a little different from the way that Black Swan talks about anecdotes, the way you're talking about. But I'm actually a big fan of anecdotes in business, not building a narrative structure around them necessarily, but I still have an email address that customers can write to. I see most of those emails, and I don't answer very many of them anymore, but I see them, and I forward them, some of them, the ones that catch my curiosity, I forward them to the executives in charge of that area with a question mark. And that question mark is just a shorthand for, can you look into this? Why is this happening? What's going on? And what I find that's very interesting is we have tons of metrics. We have, weekly business reviews with these metric decks, and we know so many things about customers and their whether we're delivering on time, whether the packages have too much air in them and, wasteful of packaging and so on. We have so many metrics that we monitor. And the thing I have noticed is that when the anecdotes and the data disagree, the anecdotes are usually right. There's something wrong with the way you're measuring it. And that's why it's so important to to keep your, you need to run something where you're doing, shipping billions of packages a year. For sure, you need good data and metrics. Are you delivering on time? Are you delivering on time in every city? Are you delivering on time to apartment complexes? Are you delivering on time in certain countries? You do need the data, but then you need to check that data with your intuition and your instincts, and you need to teach that to all the senior executives and junior executives too.
Still have the 2 pizza rule and no PowerPoints?
Oh yeah, the 2 pizza team. We try to create teams that are no larger than can be fed with 2 pizzas. We call that the 2 pizza team rule. No PowerPoints are used inside of Amazon. So every meeting, when we hire a new executive from the outside, this is the weirdest meeting culture you will ever encounter. And new executives have a little bit of, culture shock in their first Amazon meeting, because what we do is somebody for the meeting has prepared a 6-page memo, a narratively structured memo that is got, real sentences and topic sentences and verbs and nouns, not just bullet points. And it lays out and supposed to create the context for what will then be a good discussion. So, and then we read those memos silently in the meeting. So it's like a study hall. And we do that, everybody sits around the table, and we read silently for usually about half an hour, however long it takes us to read the document. And then we discuss it. And it's so much better than the typical PowerPoint presentation for so many reasons.
You were quoted as saying, I believe you have to be willing to be misunderstood if you're going to innovate. So how are you misunderstood?
If you're going to do anything new or innovative, you have to be willing to be misunderstood. And if you can't tolerate that, then for God's sake, don't do anything new or innovative. Every important thing we've done has been misunderstood, often by well-meaning, sincere critics, sometimes, of course, by self-interested, insincere critics. But I'll give you an example. 1,000 years ago, we started this thing called customer reviews, and we let customers review books. We only sold books at that time, and customers could come in and rate a book between 1 and 5 stars, and they could write a text-based review. You guys are very familiar with this. It's now a very normal thing. But back then, this was crazy, and the book publishers, did not like this, because of course, not all the reviews are positive. And I got a letter from one publisher that said, I have a good idea for you. Why don't you just publish the positive customer reviews? And I thought about this, and the argument he was making to me is that our sales would go up if we just published the positive customer reviews. And I thought about this, and I thought, I don't actually believe that, because I don't think we make money when we sell something. We make money when we help someone make a purchase decision. And it's just a slightly different way of looking at it, because part of what they're paying us for is helping them make a purchase decision. And if you think about it that way, then you want the negative reviews too. And of course, it has been extremely helpful for people to have negative customer reviews. And by the way, it's come full circle now, where the product manufacturers use the customer reviews to improve the next generation of the product. So it's actually helping the whole ecosystem. And now nobody criticizes customer reviews. And in fact, if you were here in the year 2018, if some e-commerce company were to say, we're only going to publish the positive customer reviews, that would be the crazy thing that would get criticized. So the new and innovative quickly becomes the new normal, and then it's the new incumbent idea, and then it doesn't get criticized. By the way, more generally, and what I preach at Amazon to all of our employees is when we are criticized, there's a simple process that you need to go through, which is first you look yourself in the mirror and decide, is your critic right? Do you agree? Are we doing something wrong? If you are, change. And by the way, if you look yourself in the mirror and you decide that your critic is wrong, as we did with the customer reviews, then do not change, no matter how much pressure is brought to bear. Do the right thing in that case as well. Have a deep keel. You have to have a deep keel. The thing I worry about the most is that we would lose our way in one of those things, that we would lose our obsessive focus on customers, or would somehow become short-term oriented, or would start to become overly cautious, kind of failure averse, and therefore unable to invent and pioneer. You cannot invent and pioneer if you cannot accept failure. To invent, you need to experiment. And if you know in advance that it's going to work, it is not an experiment. And so that's a very important thing. They are inseparable twins, failure and invention. And so you have to be willing to do that. And it's embarrassing to fail. It's always embarrassing to fail. But you have to say, no, that's not how this works. If I said to you, you have a 10% chance with a particular decision, a 10% chance of a 100x return, you should take that bet every time. But you're still going to be wrong 9 out of 10 times. And it's going to feel bad 9 out of 10 times. And with technology, the outcomes, the results can be very long-tailed. The payoff can be very asymmetric, which is why you should do so much experimentation. Everybody knows that if you swing for the fences, you hit more home runs, but you also strike out more. But with the baseball, that analogy doesn't go far enough, because with baseball, no matter how well you connect with the ball, you can only get 4 runs. The success is capped at 4 runs. But in business, every once in a while, you step up to the plate and you hit the ball so hard, you get 1,000 runs. And so when you have that kind of asymmetric payoff, and one at bat can get you 1,000 runs, it encourages you to experiment more. It's the right business decision to experiment more. It's also better for your customers. Customers like the successful experiments. By the way, this is a giant misconception in a lot of young entrepreneurs, inexperienced entrepreneurs that they meet. One of the things that is very fashionable right now is to talk about how disruptive their business plan is going to be. But invention is not disruptive. Only customer adoption is disruptive. At Amazon, we've invented a lot of things that customers did not care about at all. And believe me, they were not disruptive to anyone. So it's only when customers like the new way that anything becomes disruptive. And so really it's just saying that you want to, if somebody comes to you with a business plan that they claim is disruptive, you should ask them to explain it to you in simpler language. And the simpler language is, why are customers going to adopt this? Why are they going to like it? Why is it better than the traditional way? By the way, one thing I should point out about failure, and this is a fine point, internally we take it, we know it, and we don't need to talk about it much, but there's a different kind of failure which is not what you want. That's where you have operating history, and you do know what you're doing, and you just screw it up. So that's not a good failure. That's not an experiment. That's just bad operational excellence. And so like if we've opened 130 fulfillment centers, we're on generation 8 of our fulfillment center technology. If we open a new fulfillment center and just woof it, we have to do some internal examination. That's not an experiment. That's just bad execution. So there's different kinds of failure, and you need to make sure you're making the right kind of failure. The right kind of failure should be an invention. It should be something that, it's an experiment. You don't know if it's going to work, and you know up front that you don't know if it's going to work. You need to identify your big ideas, and there should only be 2 or 3 of them. And then if a senior leader, the main job of a senior leader is to identify 2 or 3 important ideas, and then to enforce great execution against those big ideas. And the good news is that the big ideas are usually incredibly easy to identify. You shouldn't need to think about them very much. You already know what they are. Let me give you an example. For Amazon, the consumer business, The three big ideas are low prices, fast delivery, and vast selection. You don't need, it's not the kind, the way you know that they're the big ideas is because they're so obvious. The big ideas should be obvious. And by the way, it's very hard to maintain a firm grasp of the obvious at all times. So little things can distract you from the obvious. But you have to back up and say, these are the three big ideas. How do we always deliver things a little faster? How do we always reduce our cost structure so that we can have prices that are a little lower? And the good thing about these big ideas is they will be stable in time. So I know for a fact that 10 years from now, customers are still going to like low prices. No matter what happens with technology and everything else, no matter what happens, people are going to like faster delivery. It is impossible for me to imagine a scenario where 10 years from now, a customer comes to me and says, Jeff, I love Amazon. I just wish you delivered a little more slowly. This is so inconceivable that you can have great conviction as a leader to continue to put energy into driving speed of delivery. And whatever in AWS, I know that customers, they like low prices, they like availability, they don't want the services to be down, they like data security. It's not very hard to figure out what the big ideas are, and then you can keep putting energy into those things, and you spin up those flywheels, and they'll still be paying you dividends 10 years from now.